people had taken over a building. Only hours after the riot, police had arrested, detained, and beaten protesters did the university send out an announcement correcting its own false reports. These militarized riot police at a lawful gathering at University of California, Irvine, corralled, beat, stomped on, and arrested nearly 50 human beings. I was one of those. There are still over a dozen people facing criminal charges due to this unlawful police action on May 15th. This is an important fact because throughout the country, in many places, the charges were dropped, though that was a pretext for doing even more harmful things. But I wanted to note that this was one of the campuses where everyone who was arrested faced charges, including people who were not arrested on that day, but then were later gathered up and then faced charges. I faced the including resisting arrest and resisting a peace officer with the threat of violence. Over 11,000 concerned people, students, scholars from around the world have signed letters in 7 languages asking that these charges be dropped against all of the people who were arrested. I'm here today because I'm aim to talk about how UCI's encampment was a student-led teaching and learning experience that the administration responded to with terrifying violence. And from my vantage point, the response to the teaching and learning environment that was student-led is pretty much the same thing as fearing the mission of the university itself. The encampments were student-led learning spaces for practicing democracy. Being afraid of a student encampment is very much like being afraid of the mission of the university itself. The students offered a vision of a peace-driven world, a world where religion and culture are not weaponized, and a world after colonial terror. They also anticipated this fascist return to plantation economics. So much of the footage from films like The Encampments makes me cry because what you witness are Arab, Palestinian, Israeli, and Jewish students creating life together without subjection and domination, creating a classroom without walls that shows us that empire need not drag us into war making. When I reflect on the encampments, I think about Alice Walker's poem from 2015 entitled, "They Will Always Be More Beautiful Than You." In the poem, Alice Walker wrote, and I quote, "They will always be more beautiful than you, the people you are killing. You think it is hatred that you feel, but it is really envy, because you imagine if you destroy them, we will forget how tall they stood, how level their gaze, how straight their backs, how even the littlest ones stood their little ground." I think that poem and that's the end of the quote of her poem. I think the poem is really important because it reminds us of the actual simple beauty of students' commitments to teach each other, to protect each other, and to disavow their enormous privilege as the children of the elite, the desire to learn how to be traitors to the imperialist capital that pays their tuition. And that was beautiful to me. Because I study economic justice, the student encampments were also beautiful because they reminded me of rotating credit associations and vibrant mutual aid that we can see in practices like susus and partner hands. And we see all around the world unbanked, racialized, and migrant women creating and sustaining what my colleague Carolyn Hossein has called banker lady practices. In Hossein's research, we learned that people possessed by anti-capitalist impulses can coordinate to open businesses, buy homes, pay for school, and other major investments of time and resources communally without exploiting everybody on the planet. A rotating credit association never relied on war making and genocide in Congo, Rwanda, Sudan, DC, or Palestine. The student encampment sought to teach a lesson that university education need not be funded by rapacious global capitalism paid for by weapons manufacturers. No wonder the students had to be arrested and charged with crimes and beaten into submission, because the students gave us a vision of universities that no longer are available to be shills for the powerful. They upset all the places that the billionaires like to hide their money. These encampments upended the treating of universities like bad debt. If you take a moment with me and listen to this analogy, as somebody who grew up in a predominantly Black city that was completely abandoned and disinvested in, what I know about the student protest is that they refused to have the university and spaces of learnings be declared as places that could be bought for pennies on the dollar by the grandkids of slumlords, also known as gentrifiers. They actually meant to teach us something about the relationship between money, education, finance, and governance. They also held spaces for accountability, which meant that they had to work through storms, stones, deep contradictions, their own training in elitism and patriarchy as if their lives depend on it. Because actually, all of our lives depend on our willingness to get to work for a free Palestine. Those are the kinds of things that I observed in the encampments as a social force. It's not something that was ever assigned on anyone's syllabus. Instead, it was a gift, a civilizational inheritance that students brought to campus to teach the corporations that we all work for that they must treat people with regard and dignity, or they will be forced to do so. In a recent Democracy Now! Interview, Catherine Frank referred to Columbia's brand being ruined. In cities like Oakland and Detroit and Flint and Jackson, when the city economy is run into the ground, it is often to collectively remove investment, to starve and sicken communities, and to make them easily available for looting by financiers. We've already seen universities turned into money laundering agencies. My question is, who is the financial cabal ready to pounce on and sell off a weakened and dismantled higher education? All the facilities, all the museums, all the libraries, the dormitories, the parking lots, the student rec centers, the disabled students' offices, the registrar's office, the learning commons. Who is planning to loot these institutions? Shauna Redmond considers the same relationship between higher education and finance in a piece that was published on LitHub just a week ago. Quote, Columbia's administrative brokers are now a vanguard in the validation and enforcement of additional forms of extreme violence, from epistemicide to onticide, having sold the multi-billion-dollar university to the Trump administration for pennies on the dollar. I think about Isabel Soule Soifer's powerful dissertation about Columbia's horrid amoral relationship to Harlem, and how whenever a scholar writes about the embodied and geographic implications of gendered racial capitalism in communities that are actually fighting back, it's hard for them to find work. Meanwhile, everything Soifer described in that brilliant dissertation and those many years of research was a portent and a warning about how an Ivy League university clicked up with tech bro financiers and surveillance tools could loot and police their neighbors, their history, and their future. And that happened long before women presidents of Ivy League universities were being hauled into Congress by craven, miseducated, and ugly-minded people who had worked their way into the people's house. Robbed and destroyed of its own geographical neighbors, students, and legacy for money. I remember Alice Walker's poem, Welcome to the Picnic, in which she writes, and I quote, "We have lived within the soul of brutality from the beginning of our connections here. The harshness of knowing our journey could easily steal our joy. To learn not to extend our disaster, that is what teachers are for," end quote. Today, on this National Day of Action, I am grateful for my students who are my teachers, for my colleagues who are my teachers, for alumni and mentors and community who are my teachers, because they teach me to know the worth of learning, of reasoning together, and learning from before the cradle to after the grave. Thank you.
Tiffany, thank you so much for this incredible testimony of your experience at the UC Irvine encampment, and of your analysis of the encampment as a microcosm of the many intersecting threats that we're facing throughout our higher education system today. The repression and abuse of Palestinian voices and pro-Palestine activists, in imbrication with the many financial and racialized systems of power and inequality within which we live on a day-to-day basis in our academic institutions. I can think of no more powerful opening to the Day of Action Palestine webinar than this. Tiffany is a professor of global and international studies at UC Irvine and professor extraordinarius in the Chief Albert Luthuli Research Chair at the University of South Africa. Thank you, Tiffany. This webinar is part of 15 that the Coalition of Action for Higher Education has organized on this Day of Action, starting with the displacement webinar organized by the Modern Language Association Radical Caucus at 10 a.m. Eastern, and going all the way through to our flagship event, the Teach-In, which takes place at 7 p.m. Eastern. The significance of this webinar in particular is that it foregrounds and centers Palestine at the heart of CAHI's actions, activities, and philosophy. Palestine is a crucible, as we like to say it. Heather, in particular, says of the intersecting economic and political threats and challenges that we're facing throughout the American higher education system at the moment. It's the weapon that's being used by not just this federal government, but by every government for at least the last 40 or 50 years to clamp down on free speech and academic freedom in our higher education institutions, and a weapon that's been used to dismantle our higher education institutions. Also, as we've seen over the last year and a half, it's a site of resistance, of solidarity, and of love. And we're seeing a flourishing of a new generation of students who will not abandon Palestine, who will not be silenced into submission, and who will not be afraid to call a genocide, who are not afraid to say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. At heart, this webinar is an homage to our brave and passionate students. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speakers, Andrew Ross and Rabab Abdulhadi, who will be giving opening comments for about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions with the audience. Andrew Ross is professor of social and cultural analysis at New York University. He is the author and editor of more than 25 books, including Stone Men, The Palestinians Who Built Israel, and is the director of NYU's Prison Research Lab. He currently serves as the secretary for the National Network of Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew. Rabab Abdulhadi is a Palestinian scholar, activist, educator, editor, and an academic director. She is an associate professor of ethnic studies and the founding director of Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies at San Francisco State University. She is compiling critical oral histories of Palestinian activism and editing an anthology on teaching Palestine. She's also convening roundtables on Black liberation, abolition and reparations, and whose narrative, gender, justice, and Palestine. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabab. I'm going to hand things over to Andrew now, and then we'll.
Thank you, Kareem and Heather, and also Tracy and others for pulling off this remarkable feat on the Day of Action. It's really, really awesome and history making. This also happens to be Palestinian Prisoners' Day, which is a very important date on the calendar of the Palestinian movement. The Prisoners' Day was first chosen in 1974, really to mark the first prisoner exchange between Israelis and Palestinians and it is a way to express solidarity with the prisoners who are the moral compass of Palestinian liberation. And I mention it to really also to remind us about the original and primary purpose of the military operation on October the 7th, which was to take hostages in hopes that they could be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. And that purpose has been, obscured by the fog of war and the flood of propaganda aimed at demonizing that day. But this is a longstanding practice and policy to take captives to exchange for Palestinian prisoners who have been wrongfully incarcerated. The other reason I mention it is because I want to draw attention to the continuum of carcerality that we've witnessed since October 2023. Not simply with the escalation of arrests and incarceration of Palestinians, most of whom are administrative detainees held without trial or legal rights, but also because of the export or the translation of techniques of surveillance and discipline and securitization to American college campuses over the last 18 months or so. Many of our campuses now resemble heavily patrolled citadels, with walled off common spaces. We have squads of security personnel posted on every corner, high-grade surveillance infrastructure, and all these new, rules and speech and conduct, and so on and so forth. This is, I call this the emergence of a kind of garrison university. It's come as a shock to many of our liberal colleagues, though much less of a surprise if you have been involved with the Palestinian cause before October 2023. And also, I think if you're aware of the legacy of the Cold War University with its foundational funding from the Department of Defense, it's not such a great leap to see how our research universities in particular are still entangled with national security as they were in the Cold War period. And if someone was writing out the history of that legacy, a key moment would be the decision to supply advanced weaponry to campus police officers. You remember in 2014, the Ferguson uprising really sort of exposed the degree to which our urban police forces had been militarized through the Department of Defense's 1033 military surplus program. In 2014, almost 125 colleges had also acquired military-grade equipment, including grenade launchers, armored vehicles, and M16 assault rifles. And more recently, we've seen AI-driven systems and advanced surveillance technology, including facial recognition. All of these have become routine features of campus security. I teach regularly in our prison education program here at NYU, and I have to say the security that I encounter when I'm entering our prison is nowhere near as advanced as at NYU, where the campus safety office, can track my whereabouts as I move from building to building, swiping or tapping into the system. I think that's quite common across the country now. It hasn't escaped our notice over the last 18 months how much continuity there is between our campuses and the techniques deployed in the Israeli security apparatus. And they become more amplified now that the full force of the state is descending in our colleges to conduct witch hunts and enact deportations, ostensibly in the name of defending the Israeli state. But enough about repression. It's more important than ever to talk about resistance on this day of action, because we're still building all over the country and all over the world on an unprecedented and generation-defining wave of participation in the Palestinian cause. And even though many people are running for cover right now, and understandably so, this wave of participation will have a lasting impact. Hundreds of millions around the world will have Palestine in their hearts and minds for the rest of their lives. And we know, Tiffany just reminded us how our brave students have played an outsized role in all of that. I'm also very proud of the faculty colleagues who rose to the call to ally with them. It's a happy coincidence that we've had a new proactive leadership in power at the AUP, National AUP, over the past year, committed to fighting back against the dismantling of liberal education. AUP chapter formation and recruitment are going gangbusters all across the country. We also seen the flourishing of HELU, Higher Education Labor United, at one of the few growth sectors of the labor movement, and the emergence of FSJP chapters nationally. And in our national network for FSJP, we now have more than 130 chapters working in close parallel or coordination with the student movement and student groups, other pressure groups like the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, and also the revived Sanctuary Campus movement. And that's on top of the longstanding organizations like Paul Legal and CARE and the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, US ACPI, and others. In other words, we now have a network of organizations, many of them with overlapping memberships in a dizzying array of signal chats, a network that can jump into rapid response efforts or into planning events like the Day of Action today. We know our network is nowhere near as well resourced as either the Zionist network or the broader right-wing ecology, both of which have, deeply penetrated our legislatures and university governance boards. But the network now exists where it did not before. And it is holding fast even in the midst of the repression. And I want to acknowledge that. I know I'm supposed to say things about NYU, but I can answer any questions about NYU at Q&A time. So I'll hand it back to you, Kareem, or actually on to Rabab.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for the powerful account of the continuity of carceral logics from the genocide state to the fascist authoritarian state. I don't know which is which at this moment. I'd like to note that in addition to the 15 webinars that we have going today, we've registered no less than 186 local actions on campuses and in communities around the country today on this Day of Action. We're incredibly proud of this achievement, and this testifies to what Andrew was saying about the flourishing of a new wave of resistance in this moment. So thank you so much for the comments, Andrew. And over to you, Rabab.
Yes, thank you so much. You introduced me already. I just always start by making land acknowledgement of our campus being on indigenous Aloni people's land. And I also affirm that I'm not making a cliche acknowledgement. I'm making that because it's really important to have to emphasize and to practice going to land back for indigenous people in these lands on which we live and practice here, and to assert that this is also in terms of solidarity with Palestine. If we support the freedom in Palestine and ending the genocide that is ongoing in Palestine, we must also assert the support for indigenous people in Turtle Island, in this Western Hemisphere of the world, and also in this country. I also want to take a moment of recognition of the fallen in not only in Palestine, in Gaza, and in the West Bank, where the genocide is ongoing, and I want us to pay attention to that as educators, as people who are involved in labor unions, people involved in academic freedom, people involved in all struggles, to pay attention to the details of what's going on in Palestine, in Lebanon, all over the world, because it's really important to acknowledge and assert that justice is indivisible. I also wanted to affirm that today is Palestinian Prisoners' Day, And one of the things that Palestinian prison movement says that prison is a university. And it's really important to think, what does this really mean? As a place where people learn, and people learn how to resist repression. And that's where the oppressors also learn and teach how to oppress further, to crush the spirit of the people. And this is also connected to Mahmoud Khalil, who refers to himself as a political prisoner. So this is connects also the two places where we're talking about in the US and in Palestine. And I think it's also as a framework that to discuss, to connect San Francisco State, the day-to-day that is very important. And Palestine is that to acknowledge within our framework that we are speaking about two settler colonial regimes, the United States and Israel. It might be something that we need to study further, because it has been only recognized recently and not in many quarters in the US Academy, in some quarters, and maybe it has been recognized, but it's not a very easy pill to swallow, because if you recognize the United States as a settler colonial regime, then there is a lot of things that we need to change the way we approach the United States and think about policing and discipline, maybe going back to the slave patrols, and maybe going back even further to the ways in which this country has sought in its genocide against indigenous population, the use of terror, the use of killing machines, the use of genocide, that we're not talking about exactly the same weapons, because of course there is a very different ways of doing it. And in comparative analysis, things are never exactly the same. That's why it's comparative. It's not the same thing. But the application, the ideology, the methodology, and so on, I think it's really worth understanding and applying, and understanding what is going on, and why there is also a very strong affinity between the ways in which the United States and Israel also have a very strong ideological and philosophical tie, not only political and strategic, which they do, political and strategic tie, which makes the United States very eager and very supportive of the Israeli settler colonial project and of the project of the genocide against the Palestinian people in Palestine, that has destroyed every single university in Gaza, has destroyed so many faculty, has killed so many students, has denied 40,000 high school students the right to even matriculate, to be able to apply to universities, that even when universities here in the United States offer, or in other places in Europe, offer scholarships, and we don't have enough. There isn't enough, and this is a call to offer more places and more scholarships. They can't even apply because they don't have a high school diploma. So they don't have the means to compete with other students from other parts of the world. So this is where all of this stuff also comes in. And so we need to also think about that, and think about where the academic labor comes in. Where do we think about that? And how do we think about academic freedom? And how do we think about protecting our academic institutions in higher ed when we think about the Palestine, and what is it that we're talking about in higher ed? What is the university? What are our universities? In Arabic, the university campus is called Haram Jami'i. Haram means it's a sacred space. The university campus is a sacred space. It means it's a sacred space that should not have police, that should not have patrol, that should not have university police or city police or armed guard, or should not have armed guard coming in and killing students, shooting like what happened in Kent State during the war in Vietnam, or what happened with my colleague Tiffany when they came in and beat up students and faculty, what happened at UCLA when Israeli supporters came in and beat up the students, and then the Palestinian students and their faculty and supporters were accused of being the aggressors. This happens again and again and again in all our universities. This is a sacred space where people need to learn and be able to study with each other and be able to feel uncomfortable. Feeling uncomfortable in the university is actually number one requirement for critical thinking. If students and faculty and hopefully the administration are not feeling comfortable, are feeling uncomfortable, feeling comfortable, it means there is something wrong with our brains. It means our brains are asleep and lazy at this point. So that's one of the things that we really need to think about the mission of education and what kind of higher education that we are protecting and what kind of institutions we are protecting. The second thing that I would want to talk about when I'll come to talk about San Francisco State is that what kind of a university also are we talking about? Are we talking about a university, which also the demand for the National Call for Action today is what kind of a university is? Are we talking about a university that's a company, a corporation, or are we talking about a university that offers education for all? Are we engaging in a university that produces education only for the few who can afford it and it charges students high amount of tuition and then offers a very inferior kind of education like our public institutions, including my own university? Or are we talking about enabling everybody to have a free education? That means free of tuition, but also freedom of thought, which is a very important aspect. All of these aspects have happened at San Francisco State, and where policing has been going on, unfortunately, way before what we're witnessing today. San Francisco State has been a test case indeed for applying all of the repression, the time, place, and manner ruling that has been going on, for submitting letters of reprimand against faculty. I've experienced that. For reprimanding students, for expelling students and not allowing them to be on campus, for advocating for Palestine, for allowing Zionist students to attack Palestinians and other anti-Zionist students, and for allowing them to actually file lawsuits against and for shrinking the Ahmed Studies program and reducing it to almost nothing and trying to crush every single achievement we have done. We started the program that the university wanted to build in 2007. And I was very much excited because I hoped that we will be able to build on the legacy of San Francisco State as the home of the 1968 strike by the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front, and one of the students who led the attack on Alcatraz from the American Indian movement, Richard Oak. And I thought this would actually create the legacy where the students demanded the College of Third World Studies. And that was very exciting for me to connect the learning of around Palestine and Arab and Muslim studies and the liberation studies with the studies of what's happening in the US and break this dichotomy between domestic and foreign, and enable the whole creation of justice-centered knowledge. Unfortunately, San Francisco State had by that time already used the strike of 68 as a photo opportunity and has become much more neoliberal and much more privatized and much more susceptible and in cohorts with the Zionist agenda. I would say susceptible because it's not only responding to donors. That is one thing, and I think this is something that's really important for all of us to kind of continue being aware of, that it's not just pressure of the donors. We heard about the donors, but it also because the university administration, as we also have seen by the presidents of the Ivy League and private universities, it's not only because there are pressures by the donors, but also because they are already predisposed ideologically, theoretically, philosophically, politically to an ideology that makes them suited to become the administrators of a company, CEOs, CFOs of a company called the university that is run to maintain what they quote unquote call law and order and produce docile citizens that will keep the business as usual system, and that will reproduce the system to maintain the power of the 1% and the control of the money and of the resources of everything over the 99%. This is where the university, this is how university administrators become, and this is what's happening with us at San Francisco State. Thus, the university administration, and I'm not only talking about the president, I'm talking about 4 provosts that have come since I've been there, 3 university presidents, explains why is it that our university president welcomes enamored with Edward Said, but then welcomes Zionists to campus. Why a provost revokes my travel to Palestine to engage with Al-Qaus in producing an anti-colonial discourse on sexuality in Palestine, and why I'm subjected to 5 years of audit of travel, even though it's been already audited multiple times again and again and again. Why is it that the provost asks me to remove a Facebook post of a Jewish anti-Zionist group called Jews Against Zionism, in which a student has a T-shirt says, "I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist, free Palestine," because Zionist groups have protested, not only protested because they say that this is anti-Semitic, but protested because they believe that I am misusing the monetary rights of the university to own the rights to the name of San Francisco State. So we, as a program of the university, are not allowed to be part of the, even though a lot of programs do it, but we're not allowed to use the name of the university and all of these things. It is not really supposed to be McCarthyism and against academic freedom and so on, but it is about how dare you, again and again and again, AMCHA and the Anti-Defamation League stand with us and so on. Why is it that the university Zionist groups come in, all the Zionist groups come in and say that our collaboration with Palestinian universities are collaboration with terrorist universities, and that I'm involved in indoctrinating students, when we all know as academics, everybody knows, you cannot indoctrinate a student in doing anything. You can't even tell a student to do their homework. You cannot even tell a student to turn off their phone if they are checking their page, and actually file a lawsuit against you, which I was sued by the university, by the Lawfare Project, in a lawsuit with 900 lawyers. And it was a test case, and I was sued in it because they said that I actually should have told the students that they should not hold a Know Your Rights law faculty fair to tell the students when Trump first came to power that of their rights, to advise them of their rights. And they said that Hillel group should not be there because it acts as eyes when Trump came to power. But and then they said this was anti-Semitic. And students, we said, well, how is it anti-Semitic when there are Jewish groups like JVP was involved in it? And we were held up in 18 months lawsuit. And in that lawsuit, I personally refused to engage in a joint defense with the university because I was worried that the university would settle with the Zionists, with the lawfare. And sure, we succeeded in the lawsuit. The judge dismissed it with prejudice. It was the only lawsuit that we won against it. Unfortunately, lawfare sued the university on its own without engaging me or COPS or any of that, and then the university settled. And all of these things now are basis for the settlements that have happened with University of North Carolina, with Duke University, with several other universities, because the universities would settle. To them, it's a question of money, and also because they don't really think it's a big problem, on the basis that the universities have not done enough to confront anti-Semitism. For us, it was a very big issue not to allow San Francisco State to settle and say that San Francisco State had engaged in anti-Semitic behavior due to a Palestinian activism, to Palestinian student activism, to activism for Palestinian freedom, due to the Ahmed Studies program that teaches about Palestinian freedom, teaches justice-centered activism. All of these things have been again and again used. The end result of it is that this one part of the problem is that one positive aspect of it has been the support by our own union, our faculty union, and the San Francisco Labor Council, which has passed 3 resolutions in support of us. But also it has been also treated by many people in the academy as sort of something that doesn't concern us because it's about Palestine. It is not something that should concern other people, which is something that I think it's really important for us to discuss, because had we dealt with some of these issues earlier on, and it's not something that's exceptional to me in the United States, this is the story of Palestine. So I think we really need to figure out how we can, on this National Day of Action, increase our work in order for all our colleagues to understand that an injury to one is indeed an injury to all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rabab, for your immensely articulate and wide-ranging account of the ideological connections between Israel and the United States, as well as the political, material, and strategic connections between them. Your discussion of how this impacts higher education nationwide, and you're bringing all of this home for us at San Francisco State University and your own experiences there. Masterful presentation. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. I'd like to get things going by stating that this is a moment, this webinar is a moment on the National Day of Action for Higher Education where Palestine gets genuinely centered. I'd like to start by asking for basically reports from the ground from Palestine. What details are we not picking up on here in the United States, not just in the press, not just in the media, but also in our own circles as we become increasingly worried and mobilized around the kidnapping and deportation of students, the shuttering of departments, and the obscene demands, the extortive demands made by the federal governments at our universities. What details from the ground on Palestine would you like us to know? Perhaps we can start with you, Rabab.
Yeah. I think I will just give an example that connects San Francisco State with Palestine. In 2018, we were on our way to start teaching Palestine conference with Bir Zait and Najah. It was just on our, and Campus Watch, which is Middle East Forum. We know it's started by one of the leading Islamophobes in the country. At the post, and I will read it to you, says San Francisco State University Professor Rabab Abdelhadi is currently holding a conference at West Bank Bir Zait University, where Israeli forces just arrested the member of the Hamas student faction. It was Omar Kiswani, who was 24-year-old. He was arrested on March 7th, and actually Bir Zait University website has a post on it. And I'll continue from Campus Watch. On suspicion of terrorist activity, Abdelhadi has already brokered the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between SFSU and terror promoting An-Najah University, while expressing interest doing the same with Bir Zait University. Please sign the Middle East Forum petition to end the MOU with An-Najah University and send a message to SFSU that taxpayers' dollars should not be funding partnership with institutions that harbor terrorists. So in this message that they're trying to do, they do several things. They tell San Francisco State, do not support the project of teaching Palestine. They're saying that Bir Zait and An-Najah University are terrorist universities in order to say that Palestinians don't have the right to education, because we're always talking about the right to education. We're talking about how many students are in prison. We're talking about within prisons themselves, how Israel always arrests students right before they go to Tawjih, right before they finish graduation. Not a single university, and I've said it so many times, not a single commencement in any Palestinian university was full. Not a single one. There are all empty. Wherever you go, there are always empty seats, because for students and for faculty, because some are martyred, some are kidnapped, some are, especially they came into the university. This was actually the first time they dressed like Palestinians. They came into the campus and they kidnapped the students, and now they're doing so much more again and again and again. Faculty the same way. They destroy library, they destroy books, they burn books. I mean, who does that? Who does that? And we know this reminds us from Holaco to any who burns library. So this has been, I mean, aside from what's going on in Gaza. So this is something that we should be really aware of, and we should be engaged in twinning agreements, in collaborating with our colleagues and so on, in order for us to, I mean, they're producing amazing knowledge despite under the gun. So we really need to be connecting with that and being aware every single day of what's going on.
This is such an important point, Rabab, and while the world's attention is focused on Gaza and the decimation of the entire education system there, the same continues in less visible forms in the West Bank and, of course, in 48 Palestine itself. This question came up for me when I invited Palestinian students from the University of Haifa to join my Palestine class at the University of Colorado Boulder just last Friday. And they asked us all, do you know what's going on? Do you know what's happening with us in 48 Palestine? And is this represented on your syllabus? I shamefully had to say not sufficiently, not sufficiently. And then I explained to my US students that while Gaza resembles a concentration camp and is comparable to 1930s and 1940s Germany and Europe, the West Bank is comparable to apartheid South Africa, and 48 Palestine is comparable to the Jim Crow South. And these connections have to remain fresh and apparent in our minds when we engage with the question of Palestine. It's not just Gaza. Andrew, any details from the ground that you'd like people to know about that you think they're not sufficiently aware about?
I would just echo Rabab's comments. I think in the West Bank, at least, a lot of the new restrictions on mobility, the new checkpoints, the new iron gates that are being erected almost everywhere, severely posed an obstacle to students and faculty to getting to their campuses. So many of the campuses in the West Bank are barely functioning. I do want to make one point, however, about the situation on Israeli campuses, because a lot of the folks who are attending this webinar probably attend or teach at universities that do have study abroad programs in Israel. And we do have a campaign at National FSJP that is aimed at dismantling these programs. And they're relatively easy to target on your campuses because the operation of these programs is probably in violation of your campus policies and codes of ethics against discrimination, because they are essentially discriminatory in nature. And so we're trying to, promote this campaign. If you feel that you want to take on your study abroad program in Israel that your campus has, then please be in touch with us, National FSJP, or you can just be in touch with me at NYU. And we'll give you some directions and some guidelines about how to target these programs, because they must come down. And the BDS movement, PACB, has asked for specifically to target these programs.
I'll just add that between October 23 and December 24, 898 new checkpoints were erected in the West Bank or Eastern Palestine alone. I think the objective there is to surround the population centers, destroy the refugee camps, and gradually funnel the population into Bantustans or reservations where, if not, expel them altogether. Tiffany, anything you'd like to add from the ground in Palestine?
Yeah, I want to actually I want to reinforce this point that Rabab made about the difference between here and there, and talk about the subtle kinds of ways that we're engaging in self-repression and self-silencing, because it is both the question of where students are able to go study abroad in places that are discriminatory, but also the kind of silencing that international studies offices on campuses are experiencing. And so university affiliates are being told things like, you cannot travel. If you travel, these are the things that we can't do for you as a university. So there's an attempt to kind of isolate people who would be doing solidarity work and, really keep us from being in connection with each other and to just really frighten people. The signal and the kind of resonant impact of the arrests and the visa and detentions that have happened it's massive. And so I just hope that people really sit with colleagues and really come to very concrete strategies about how to keep people safe and also keep being willing to travel to the extent that you can do it and not be detained.
Rabab, you'd like to make a point about study abroad?
Yes, actually, we tried we applied twice to do a study abroad in Palestine. San Francisco State denied us twice. They subjected us to actually the whole thing with this, the whole California State University, not just at San Francisco State, which was very different from study abroad in Israel. However, our Palestine Arab and Muslim Caucus of California Faculty Association, we drafted a resolution to stop all study abroad programs with Israel with California's California State University, which is the biggest public system in this country, and we submitted it to our union's assembly this past weekend, and it passed. So now our union, California Faculty Association, is committed to stop study abroad with Israel in all of the campuses. So now we have to make sure it's implemented and no campus can engage in any of these studies. We haven't had the chance to even we haven't gotten the votes. We just received that it's passed. So we haven't even announced it publicly or written a press release or anything. But then since you mentioned it, Andrew, I thought this would be a very appropriate day to bring good news this is kind of like you did such a wonderful job of organizing this and doing all this kind of work. So just bring you a little gift from our part of organizing.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's terrific news. Send us something official and we'll circulate it.
Amen.
Absolutely stunning. Thank you, Rabab, for this beautiful news. Alf Mabrook. Alf Mabrook. I'd like to hand things over to Heather. I mean, we only have about 4 minutes left. Perhaps if you have any questions of your own, and if any from the Q&A are particularly striking, you can raise them and invite the panelists for final comments.
Hello, all. There's a number of questions I'll just try to kind of combine into something that I think we should all recognize. This is an April 17 Day of Action, which also happens to be Palestinian Prisoners Day and the first day of the Columbia encampment. What you've seen today is the connection between carceral politics, both at, in the global north and in the global south, and the connections between the two. So we've had a number of questions, both like in the chat and in the Q&A, that ask us to foreground a little bit more how it is first that especially the elite universities in the US seem to have fallen in line with these carceral suppressive tactics. And also, how do we navigate the fact that there's so many distinct institutional and geographic dynamics as we attempt to fight back against the combo of neoliberal colonial tactics that we are seeing displayed both in Palestine and now brought back into an authoritarian regime at home. Anyone want to take that on? You have like 2 minutes.
I can say a couple of things about the elite university and I don't, okay, so the elite university, I think that, look, there are already elite universities. They are present. We should be able to think about this as resources that exist there. We should take advantage of whatever is present and use those resources in order for us to equalize the playing field with public universities. The students have done an amazing job at various places. The fact that Columbia was there, and then people say these are elite universities, and the right wing is trashing them left and right. I don't think we should be defensive about that. We should salute these students. We should celebrate them. We should protect them, and we should encourage everybody else to say, look, the students use the privilege that they have in order for them to do what they can do. They learn, and this is how they're putting their knowledge to good use. And they've done that in the 60s in Vietnam. They've done that everywhere else. And they are doing it, and other universities are doing it too. That's not really true that it's only elite universities are doing it, but they're putting the spotlight on that to kind of like show that divide and conquer, that it's not really happening elsewhere. So I think that is, I don't think there is a way to balance. I think, look, we have to do what we really need to do, and there are a lot of losses that we're going to be, incurring, and it's just part of the fight until we win, and we just need to support each other.
Good.
Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just try to be brief and perhaps remind us in closing that we're facing this repression, but and it's painful, and people are being hurt, and that's horrible. But the repression is a sign that our enemies are losing. The battle for consent and for legitimacy, for settler colonialism and the Zionist project and white supremacy, that battle for consent has failed or is failing. And the one thing that Gramsci taught us is that when consent fails, elites turn to coercion and authoritarian force and violence. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the bullying and the barbarism and the violence and the authoritarianism. And that's a sign that they are desperate and they're no longer engaging with us on the terrain of ideas. They've lost that battle. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward and keep Palestine at the center of our organizing and whatever we do.
Tiffany, would you like to make a concluding comment?
We don't really have an option to give up hope. We don't really have that as an option. If we do that, we are complicit with people who want us to just accept being disappeared. I come from people who were enslaved, and they refused to give up hope, and that's why I'm still here. And I can only do as much as they did, as much as they did. And I know, like all of us on this panel know, Palestine will be free.
Yes.
Because we will make Palestine free.
Don't know what else to say except love and solidarity forever, my brothers, sisters, and siblings. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Urabab, for the powerful presentations and beautiful responses. Thank you, Tracy and Heather, for overseeing this webinar so gracefully. And thank you all for joining us. Onwards, JVP panel now on Resisting Project Esther, and the Day of Action teach-in is at 7 p.m. Eastern. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, everybody.
Bye all. Thank you.